Hi, this is me from my hotel room. I'm out in Capitol Reef on public Wi-Fi, so if things are a little even more lo-fi than they normally are here, that's why. Um, I just wanted to post briefly on response to some stuff going on at Zero Books and some other things that I've seen lately. I almost wanted to entitle this video, "You Don't Fight Lies with Lies." I've seen a lot of frustrations with the professional left and the activist nature of the left and all these things, and I suppose my response to it has increasingly been you don't fight this with a history that's not true. I mean, the history of the left. Um, and in Europe and the United States, and even in China, it was never a coalition primarily of striking coal miners. I'm sorry, it's not true. Um, I went through the leaders of the Chartist movement, the Marxists, the Lassalleans, all of them were led by a mixture of working class people and people who would properly be called bourgeois academics. And I said mean bourgeois in the sense that they actually own businesses, not in the sense that they were substantively bourgeois in their critiques. Happy Passover. So I watched Doug Lane's recent video on Greenwald, and I don't I like Greenwald's reporting on foreign policy, except when he reports on labor unions in Brazil. I've always found him suspect in his economic analysis, but I don't go over to him for that. But picking a side with him taking very dumb, fights in the culture war is just not something I'm interested in. But I know that it drives clicks. And that's one of the things that I think is really ultimately corrupting a lot of the online left is that there is a cultural commentary nature to it, and there has been for about 4 decades. That cultural commentary nature has been mostly destructive, and it pulls people either to two different forms of rightism, to a identitarian rightism, and that can be in the nationalist, white nationalist even variety, or in a counter signaling this form of identitarianism that emerges. I mean, even Christopher Lash, towards the end of his life, starts talking about things like working class traditionalism and doesn't even define what it is. Now, I know that this drives clicks. Varn blog has 400 subscribers if I'm rounding up. Yes, I built it in 3 weeks, mostly during my hiatus. But when I talk about real stuff, it has a limited viewpoint, partly because I have low production values. I don't have a lot of time to spend spending 5 to 6 hours for every 1 hour I produce on cleaning this up. I just don't. But what I'm noticing is there's a long trend, not just on the post left, which is really an anti-left. Even Zero Books is beginning to realize that it's really an anti-left position. That as Stop Clock is saying, all the commentary is coming out right now is basically the culture war is bad. Here's my take on the culture war. And I can tell you guys that gets clicks. It plays the algorithm. It gets people who are famous to engage with you. Glenn Greenwald's never told me off, even though I've known about him for longer than Doug Lane has. I first encountered Greg Greenwald's reporting on LouRockwell.com about 6 or 7 years before The Intercept existed. All right. A lot of the people I followed on the anti-war left were the same people I followed on the anti-war right. And so Glenn's positions don't generally surprise me. I talk about it like I know him. But I feel like the counter signaling has deeply infected everything. If anything, it makes me respect someone who I didn't think I would respect. Like Jimmy Dore, who I think counter signals and does all kinds of stupid preening to the right. But let's be honest, he's actually holding a fucking programmatic line, which no one else can seem to be able to do. You know, the far left feels like it's in exploratory mode, and everybody else seems to be either trying to take a side on this culture war or trying to take a side on geopolitics in ways that are not consistent with any left-wing position. Um, well, if you Grimlock, if you think there's no way out of the culture war, then you think there's really no way out of bourgeois politics, and you should really just pick a side. I mean, if it's that much of a closed system, then there's really no point to trying to be outside of that closed system. You just accept the best of two bad choices. That it's as simple as that. Like, and I think that's what you see actually happening. That's what you see happening in a lot of these cases. You talk to a radical, and what you scratch is just you know, the socialist is, you know, bleeds Democrat. Look at AOC's most recent interview, pretty much exposing how obvious that was. And yet, you scratch someone who's critiquing that, and a lot of times they just bleed like a conservative Republican. But no, you can't get out of having moral stances on some of these issues. Like, you wouldn't see me saying that it's a dumb thing to fight over trans issues one way or the other. All right. I would say, though, one has to look at the disproportionate effect that sexuality has been focused on in the left-right discourse, because it's something that hits everyone in a moral core, right? One way or the other, no matter how you hit you in a moral core, and it's easy to manipulate you when you're hit in that moral core. And I think, you know, shaming people for taking sides on it, particularly, you know, the left side in particular, you know, shaming people for taking pro-trans positions is a way that a lot of right-wing actors, and I know them personally, operate. You know, they can get people to take more communitarian positions by making it sound working class, and making people's, you know, prior cultural assumptions seem like they're part of their innate class identity. The culture war has been an issue since the 60s, stop clock. You know, and it's been dominant since the 80s. I've literally been talking about how in the last 2-3 decades, there's literally been 4 cycles of culture war battles. If you look, I was reading Historians in Trouble that were tracing some of the names that we know now, like Dinesh D'Souza, all the way back to this in the 80s. The New Criterion fought this. You can even see it with the shift, actually, and this is kind of important, when a lot of the anti-communist Marxist left started working with a Center for Cultural Freedom, I believe is what it's called, in the 1950s, which was crypto-sponsored by the OSS and later the CIA. And there was an increasing focus on both sides on the culture war, except in those times it was about, you know, liberation and a lot of the human rights abuses of the Soviet Union. And to be fair, this union didn't help things by actually somewhat committing a lot of those civil rights abuses. It was one of those things where the Soviet Union called it the West out on its racism, and the West could call it out on its lack of human autonomy, particularly after the 1930s. I am somewhat tired of it, because even doing this video is like feeding into it. But I'm also tired of these myths that I see being perpetuated, like that there was ever a only like union-led working class movement. In fact, the union-led working class movement is kind of what caused the crisis of the socialist movement in the first place. Because everyone assumed prior to 1914 that people did not have that their class interests transcended their national ones, and they did not consistently. You know, and yes, while it is true that, particularly in the case of, say, the Nazi Germany, you had a petit bourgeois and lumpen petit bourgeois even backing. In the case of fascists in Italy, it's actually harder to say that their backing was solely the middle class. The national syndicalist movement did have actual workers in it. And you see the first example of accelerationism leading to shifts right. So Mussolini, for example, supports Italy entering World War I to destroy the Italian state and ends up actually having patriotic fervor for Italy in the Italian state itself. So a lot of the left positions that we have problems with now, we've had problems with for 100 years or longer. I'm disheartened. Anyway, happy Passover. I'm gonna enjoy my time in the mountains. Just wanted to talk about it for a minute, being very frustrated with everything, and live stream to you guys. I would normally do a prep video, but again, I don't have my proper equipment with me, so live streams people are more forgiving of the fact you're talking literally background light of a hotel room. Good night.